Family Islam. I want to go in on a subject that I get a lot of questions about these three particular contracts that are the worst contracts pretty much on the planet. And it's not to say that there's no remedy when you're dealing with these things, but I will say that they're voluntary and you should never sign or avoid at all costs. Now, the child support one in particular, you can find a little bit more easier remedy for that one than the other two. But what I will say is that sometimes it can't be avoided, getting it filed on you. But if it is indeed frivolous or you don't consent to the contract, and I'll say you have ways of handling your own things privately, with your own family issues, then there's definitely ways of getting out of that contract. Um, and I'll say it'll be a little bit easier than these other two. Now, I want everyone to understand that contracts are voluntary, for one. Contract law, in a sense, falls under private law, but what's most important to understand is you can't necessarily claim threat, duress, and coercion and say you were forced to sign a contract, um, unless you can really, really prove that. And I want to use this probation parole example, most for that, because I get people that, they get themselves into a jam, and what happens is they sign for probation to get out of jail because they say, I couldn't afford to stay in there, so, I signed it under threat, duress, and coercion. There's a big issue with that. Huge issue with that. It's extremely hard to prove. I mean, maybe if that's exactly what you write down on there, you have, some remedy. But that's a horrible idea, people. Like, I can understand, you getting locked up and not being able to afford being in there. You know, you're losing money, not making money, could be losing deals, things of that sort. I've been through it as well. The thing is, though, you can't panic and make a bad decision like that and think it doesn't have repercussions. See, I've helped people out with court cases in several jurisdictions and in several different states. And what I notice is, and I've heard other people talk about this, like the brother Yusufel, and a few other people that are really sharp, say basically along the lines that it's hard to prove fraud on the part of the government, these Europeans or whatever, because everything they do is out in the public. Not just that, though. Yeah. When you sign for any case, pretty much anywhere, they'll ask you something along the lines of, are you doing this out of your own free will? Is this what the lawyer told you to do, or are you doing it because you are indeed guilty? Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty? Oh, sorry. And the thing is, they're always specific with this wording to intentionally trap you. And you're attesting to this in open court before they accept the plea. So whether you sign threat, duress, coercion or not, at that point, you've basically admitted out of your mouth. And when you just admit it out your mouth that you're not coerced, and then sign threat, duress, and coercion, there's a conflict going on right there. You know, and they follow specific steps and procedures when doing these things to specifically get you trapped, caught up into these contracts. So you may think that you can just plea, get probation, go home, and because you're more, you can get it dismissed because the contract is not valid, not is null and void, because it was done out of fraud and threat, duress, and coercion. It doesn't work like that, people. Not when you state in open court that you're guilty, you know, and then sign up for this stuff. So, if you have gotten yourself into that situation, it's not to say that there isn't any remedy, but let's say in the case of probation, you know, you may be able to discharge. I'm not sure if they would call it the penal sum because the penal sum is for the actual case, but after the case, the full probation sum, because probation is always, a certain amount usually, and sometimes they can drop it down to very low depending on the charge in the court. They'll be willing to do that sometimes with certain judges, but there's also a statutory period. People sign 1 year, 2 year, 4 year probation, 5 year probation, things of that sort. That's a little bit more difficult to deal with. Not to say it's necessarily no way to get around it, no way to get off probation early, but in considering what I just said about contract law and you basically signing the contract at the age of majority or past the age of majority, you have a liability to that. That's the thing. Contract law is private, so they did a private contract with you, they're going to hold you to that contract. And these three contracts in particular, it is easier for them, it's easiest for them to attach or to have bodily attachment for not fulfilling the contract, if you understand. Even though that's illegal, holding someone for a debt is illegal, but in this sense, it's not necessarily all about the debt, it's breach of contract as well. And, these are stipulations that are put in a probation contract and a military contract and a parole contract. That bodily attachment that's there. With child support is strictly behind debt when they lock you up, and 1,000% unconstitutional, but it does happen. Child support is really like super private, double private, because not only is it a contract, but it's also family law. Probation is usually, I'm gonna say it's all the time. That's criminal, so that's public law. But child support is definitely family law, which is private law, which is why child support is voluntary. And if you're able to handle your own affairs and own obligations, there's absolutely no need for child support if you understand the basic principles of commerce and how to handle your own affairs privately. Now, with the military branch thing, that contract there is probably the worst contract on the planet. Um, I had to speak with a more that's a veteran to get a little bit more understanding on what actually goes on with that, and he brought up some dynamics that I would have never even considered. And I already knew, even before speaking with him, that it was a horrible contract. It was one of the worst contracts on the planet. I just never done a video like this on these particular ones. But besides this being a more, it's a violation to join their military. And if anyone wants more information, just hit me up in the comments about that. I could point you toward the Zodiac Constitution or maybe a few other sources. But a lot of people, they've already done that before they wake up, or um, in the case of the more that I'm speaking of, that I called particularly on this to help me out, he's a veteran. A lot of our people are veterans, and there's nothing wrong with that to a certain extent. If you've done that, that's operating in commerce, which is something that our people do. Commerce is part of our birthright. However, the military contract, I spoke with several people about this over the years and have been told some very disturbing things. Even before I spoke with the Moor, who was a trainer, pretty much, in the military. Sipping tea. Okay. With the military branch, one of the first things that stood out was I had a sister tell me that the reason she didn't join is because they told her basically she was going to have to sign over the rights to her kids to join the military. Because you're quite literally state property. 14th Amendment citizen of D.C. to a certain extent. But doing further research into that, what I saw is that on certain applications for places, not necessarily dealing with the military, but if you're a part of the military, they'll ask you about your state. And listed on some of these applications were the different branches as different states. So they're actually trusteeships, which a state is a trusteeship in a sense, but through contract. The birth certificate is held in trusteeship, which is your citizenship document. And until you learn to gain control and things of that sort, that is holding you in that position. But through the Army contract, you literally can become a citizen of the Marines or the Navy or the Army. Any military branch, you become a citizen of that branch. And through the contract, they're able to do the bodily attachment because it's part of it. Because you literally, or state property, have to do what they say when they say, to the certain extent of your contract. And what the brother pointed out is, a lot of people in their last few days, they try and take off early and things of that sort, and don't understand why they're getting locked up. It's such a harsh thing, like they're going AWOL when they only have a week or two left on their contract, not understanding the capacity, especially if they've went to war, of the trainings that they've been given and exactly what they may have done, especially if they've been in active combat. They, from what I've been told, a lot of them, they're taught how to overthrow governments, genocide, um, sequestration, escheatment, things of that sort, as a part of war. I've heard another brother say that they spend between $1 and $3 million on most of their soldiers' training as well. So what it is you're running off with is all of this knowledge. You know, they may have trained you or even trained you to train other people, so you're very proficient in certain acts that if you were to bring this back to our people and use that against them, it would be very, very detrimental, which is another reason why veterans and the VA hospital is one of the biggest to get complained about all over that I've ever heard. Because they're literally targeting certain people and poisoning them and things of that sort to make sure that, this person that they've trained for all this stuff that they're still watching to not um, do anything what they would consider out of line. You know, and they probably watch you the rest of your life after that. So, with all that being stated, I would consider that one of the worst contracts out there as well. Now I understand people have to operate in commerce and things of that sort, but you know, what side are you on? Best I can say. You can find other work, other places, that are more noble and honorable toward our people. Peace and love, family.